Good evening. Well, yet more I'm uncovering from the NatWest Bank. Subject, access request, all 600 pages of it, quite a bit to troll through. Now, this bit's important because back in April, when, of course, it was decided that, I would have my account closed, simultaneously, somebody quite senior in NatWest wrote this. In support of Coots's decision to exit Nigel Farage, significant adverse press, xenophobic comments, Russian connections, lack of clarity over source of wealth. I have confirmed that retail would have no appetite to onboard the customer if he were to apply to NatWest, Royal Bank or Ulster Bank brands. NF would represent a more complex customer beyond our vanilla commercial risk-reward appetite. So to be clear, when I was told my accounts were closing at Coots, there was absolutely no option to go to NatWest at all. Yet, a few months later, Dame Alison Rose, on the 20th of July, said, I've written to him today, meaning me, to make clear that we apologise and we reiterate our offer of alternative banking arrangements with NatWest Group. Oh, Alison Rose, you do so well, don't you? Or at least you think you do well, covering up lie after lie after lie. Are you really going to walk away from that board meeting on Thursday with £11.3 million, given that this bank is nearly 40% owned by the state? But even more seriously, in these documents, try this for size. He got paid from the Kremlin, bet he's a spy. Yep, they genuinely believed I was in the pay of Russian money. The previous statement I read out mentioned Russian connections. My links to Russia were mentioned 144 times in the Coots subject access request. I'll say it again. He got paid from the Kremlin, bet he's a spy. Tonight, albeit briefly, I want to talk to you about what fake news is. Why did people within that bank believe that one of the reasons I should be debanked is because of my connections and income from Russia? Well, this happened in the House of Commons, and it came from Sir Chris Bryant, Member of Parliament, Labour Member of Parliament for the Rhondda Valley in South Wales.
I don't understand why Aaron Banks, frankly, isn't on the list either. Even Isabel Oakeshott now thinks that he is an agent of influence for the Russian state. And I simply point out that Nigel Farage received from Russia Today £548,000, £573 in 2018 alone from the Russian state.
And that is what Coots Bank believed. And that is what many other people in this country believed. And indeed, I even had to cancel one public appearance. Such was the threat of violence against me for being in the pay of the Russians. This is how fake news is created. Bryant did this using parliamentary privilege. Now, absolutely unbeknown to me until a couple of weeks ago, on the last day before the summer recess, in the middle of an afternoon debate on a totally different subject, Sir Chris Bryant had this to say.
In a previous debate on sanctions, I referred to the former leader of UKIP. And let me be absolutely clear, I have had no correspondence of any kind, electronic or in writing or digital, with Coots Bank about him, or for that matter, about anybody else, because I don't have many constituents who bank with Coots. I don't know, I have no idea why Coots have closed his bank account. But I should have been more careful with the words that I used a year ago. The figure I gave was for his total income. I think that he has himself stated that he was paid for his appearances on Russia Today, and that Russia Today is, of course, a part of the Russian state. And he has made clear his respect for Vladimir Putin as a nationalist. But the figure I gave was nowhere near, I think, the accurate figure. So I apologise if I have inadvertently misled the House. I had no intention to do so, and I hope that that puts the record straight.
So there you are. He apologises for misleading the House. He doesn't apologise to me. He doesn't even name me at any point in that. And when he says the figure was misleading, it was nowhere near the number stated. No, Sir Chris, the number was zero. I earned zero in 2018 from any Russian-connected source of any kind whatsoever. That speech, given when it was, how it was at the time, got no press pickup at all. And this is what fake news is, folks. A narrative, an aggressive narrative that is untrue, gets created in the media, believed in the public, and when you get an apology, or half an apology as that was, nobody gets to hear of it. It does huge reputational damage. It is one of the reasons why, a major reason why, I was debanked. I'm joined by Professor Daniel Hodson, former Deputy CEO and Financial Director of Nationwide. Daniel, I'm uncovering an awful lot more this week about the culture that existed deep within the NatWest Bank. Alison Rose, when she apologised, said, some of the things that were said by Coutts did not reflect the wider bank. But clearly, some extraordinary political culture now appears to be at the heart of the kind of financial institutions that you've been a part of for much of your life.
Yes, it's a new thing, I think, and it's very worrying. I read, obviously, in detail what was said about you, and I have to say that I find it very disturbing. I don't think when I was involved in the retail banking industry that any of the staff would have behaved in this way. Of course, we tolerated the fact that everyone was entitled to political opinions, but to express them in this way is quite extraordinary. I'm afraid that it is one of the fallouts of Brexit, Nigel. Everything has got rather emotional and overtoned. But the point that you make about fake news is hugely important. And also the fact that the media, and, dare I mention our state broadcast like the BBC, don't always give the right bias, as it were. I think you were saying earlier how the spread of public opinion, and within the Tory party certainly, and within its voters, was very different from the parliamentary party itself. Yeah. I think that is true of the public as a whole. I think that our broadcasters, on the whole, tend to have a different distribution of opinion compared with the way that the country as a whole thinks.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. And yes, I expect it in much of mainstream media. I expect it of most of our members of parliament. It's just the fact this stuff has seeped in to our corporate structures, and that the FCA, the regulator, now instructs firms about what they should do to aid diversity and inclusion. And Daniel, they're also extending the test of who is a fit and proper person to work in financial services to include looking at their social media. Are we going too far with this?
Well, I mean, the social media issue is one which actually puts people off being involved in politics in the first place. But if you're talking about social media for people who are just going into a bank to get a job, that is extraordinary. And I think it's very unfortunate because, one of the great things about this country, and the thing that most people here, certainly I would go to the barriers for, is the protection of free speech. I work with people in non-political circumstances. I've never been in any way put off by their various different political opinions. No. But I think the point that I want to make more than anything else is I know, because you've said it earlier, that there are 1 million people who don't have a bank account, whom 500,000 might well probably like to have one. But also we've got to realize that this is extremely damaging to our industry. I mean, I've had cases of firms who are exporting, for instance, to the Middle East, who get debanked simply because they're doing business with Saudi Arabia. That's disgraceful. Yeah. And that should not be the case.
No, absolutely. It's a massive problem. It affects the large and the small. It's been happening on a huge scale. I hope I've done my bit to lift the lid on it. Final thought, if I may, Daniel Hodgson. Yeah. The NatWest board meet this Thursday. Yeah. They will have had the so-called review given to them by a city firm of lawyers, and they will decide on the final pay package, including bonuses for Dame Alison Rose. Given that this is nearly 40% owned by the taxpayer, would it be wrong of me to say that she should not walk away with £11.3 million?
Well, I have 2 points to make here. One is I'm surprised that the shareholders involved in these banks, and of course 40% of the NatWest is actually us, the electorate, have not stepped in here. But so far as you're concerned, Nigel, and the future of Dame Alison Rose is concerned, you remember what I said last time we had a discussion about this. The money ought to go to charity. It ought to go to charities, for instance, who actually support people who are unbanked, who are affected by these actions, or some such enterprise. I don't suppose that's going to happen, and I imagine that she is going to get her 11 million. But it tells the wrong story at a time when I think that we need more exposure in the way that you've done, Nigel, of these kind of things. Thank you for doing it.
Daniel, thank you for your support. And I'm sure it's a great shock to you as a former financial director of Nationwide to see what's happened to that industry. Thank you for joining me again here on GB News, discussing this vital topic. And it is vital because it affects absolutely all of us. We cannot live and survive properly in the 21st century without banking services. And I've used my case. I've fought back against these so-and-sos, but I haven't just done it for me. I've done it for the unbanked all over the place. I want to see real change.